The entire restaurant fell silent when the girl's trembling voice broke through the chatter of clinking plates and afternoon laughter. "I'll pay for him," she cried, her hand shaking as she stood from her chair, her cheeks flushed deeper than the sunset outside the wide glass windows. Every head turned toward her, and in that golden daylight, under the hum of ceiling fans and the scent of fresh bread, a single father stood frozen beside his young son, humiliation written across his tired face. Before we go any further, if you believe that kindness can change lives and that second chances matter, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Whisper Tales 3. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need them most. It was a bright Tuesday afternoon in early spring when this moment unfolded. Sunlight poured into the modest family restaurant on Maple Avenue, casting warm beams across the polished wooden floors. Raghav Malik had chosen this place because it was the only restaurant his 8-year-old son Arush ever talked about. Arush had seen it once while passing by on the bus, and had begged for weeks to try the Big Hero burger advertised in bold red letters on the window. Raghav had finally said yes, even though his wallet carried little more than hope. Raghav was 34, with streaks of gray already threading through his black hair. Life had carved exhaustion into his eyes. After his wife passed away 2 years earlier, he had become both mother and father overnight. He worked double shifts at a local warehouse, lifting heavy boxes by day and cleaning offices by night. Most evenings he returned home too tired to cook, but he always tried. He had mastered instant noodles and learned how to braid Arush's hair when it grew long during the winter. He carried guilt like a second skin, always feeling he wasn't doing enough. That afternoon, Arush's laughter filled the small booth as he admired the towering burger placed in front of him. Raghav smiled, watching his son's eyes sparkle. For a brief moment, the burdens of overdue rent and unpaid electricity bills faded into the background. All that mattered was the joy across the table. But joy can be fragile. When the waitress returned with the bill, Raghav felt his chest tighten. He had calculated carefully before coming, but he hadn't accounted for the hidden service charge listed at the bottom. His fingers trembled as he counted the cash in his worn leather wallet. He was short, not by much, but enough to matter, enough to humiliate. The waitress stood patiently at first, then awkwardly. A couple at the next table began whispering. Arush sensed something was wrong and stopped chewing. Raghav's throat went dry. He asked softly if he could leave his watch and return with the rest, but the manager had already been called. The manager's voice was polite yet firm, explaining policies, glancing at other customers, aware of the growing attention. That was when the chair scraped loudly against the floor. Meher Khan had been sitting alone by the window, a half-eaten salad in front of her. She was 19, broad-shouldered, with thick glasses and a face that carried years of silent battles. All her life, people had judged her by her weight before hearing her voice. She had learned to make herself small in crowded rooms, to laugh at jokes about herself before others could. But something about the way Arush looked up at his father, confusion and fear clouding his innocent face, stirred something fierce within her. Her voice cracked as she stood. "I'll pay for him," she cried, tears brimming in her eyes. The room froze. For a second, Raghav felt even more ashamed. He didn't want pity. He didn't want charity. But Meher wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Arush, whose small hands were gripping the edge of the table. There was no mockery in her eyes, no superiority, only understanding. She walked to the counter, her steps heavy but determined. She pulled out a neatly folded stack of notes from her purse. It was money she had been saving for a new pair of shoes she desperately needed. She placed it on the counter without hesitation. The manager hesitated, then accepted. Raghav tried to protest, but Meher shook her head gently. The daylight streaming through the windows caught the tears rolling down her cheeks, and in that glow, she looked stronger than anyone else in the room. She whispered that sometimes people just need a little help, and today it was her turn to give it. Raghav thanked her, his voice barely audible. Pride battled gratitude inside him, but gratitude won. He promised to repay her, though he had no idea how. The story could have ended there, another quiet act of kindness in a noisy world. But what the single dad did next shocked them all. The following afternoon, When the restaurant was again filled with the warmth of daylight and lunchtime chatter, Raghav returned. This time, he wore his cleanest shirt, though it was still faded at the collar. Arush held his hand tightly. In his other hand, Raghav carried a small envelope and a folded piece of cardboard. Meher was there again, studying near the window. She looked surprised when she saw them approach. Raghav placed the envelope on her table. Inside was the exact amount she had paid, every rupee he had managed to gather by working an extra overnight shift. But that wasn't what stunned her. He also handed her the cardboard sign he had brought. Written in bold marker were the words, "Today's meal sponsored by kindness." He had spoken to the restaurant owner that morning and convinced him to let Raghav work the entire day for free, in exchange for covering meals for 3 families who couldn't afford to pay. He would wash dishes, clear tables, and scrub floors until his hands blistered. It didn't matter. What mattered was passing forward what Meher had started. By late afternoon, 3 struggling families had eaten without fear of embarrassment. A construction worker who had forgotten his wallet, a young mother counting coins for her children's fries, an elderly man who had quietly asked for water instead of food. Each of them left with full stomachs and misty eyes. Customers began whispering again, but this time it wasn't judgment, it was admiration. Meher watched as Raghav moved tirelessly around the restaurant, sweat dampening his shirt, exhaustion etched into his face, yet a quiet pride lifting his posture. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She felt powerful. Her one brave moment had sparked something bigger. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden streaks across the room, Arush hugged Meher tightly before leaving. Raghav paused beside her table. He told her she hadn't just paid a bill. She had reminded him that the world still held goodness, and that his son had witnessed what true compassion looked like. Before we end, if this story touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your engagement keeps these stories alive and spreads their message further than you can imagine. And here's a special request. Comment the word kindness below if you believe one small act can create a ripple effect. That afternoon didn't make headlines. No cameras captured it. But for everyone who sat in that sunlit restaurant on Maple Avenue, something shifted. A young woman who had spent years hiding learned that her voice mattered. A struggling father regained his dignity, not by refusing help, but by multiplying it. And a little boy walked home holding his father's hand, understanding that true strength isn't about never falling short. It's about lifting others when you rise. In a world that often measures worth by wealth, beauty, or status, that ordinary daytime moment proves something extraordinary. Kindness is the one currency that grows the more you give it away.